Hello, everyone! Today, I'll take you to take a look at the most basic component in the digital twin, which is the parent component of all components, called scene. First, we create a whale twin, a standard project template. Then click New. In the Digital Twin 3 Digital Twin, there is it's called the building, the base scene wall. Of course, you can create any scene you want. The principle is similar. Okay, after we enter, there should be a scene like this. Then we double-click. We can enter the entire 3D editing. In the 3D editing, it will default to selecting the top one, which is this scene, and the sky below, and our camera, model layers, and vegetation. Today, we will first talk about the settings of the scene. Okay, when we select the scene, or we click on other components, such as clicking on it, right? When we click the blank area next to it, it will default to selecting this scene, this component. The settings for the scene components are on the right. Let's take a quick look. Let's first look at the basic settings. The first one is the display of small coordinates. In other words, in our scene, there will be a small coordinate in the upper right corner. This small coordinate can be synchronized with the current coordinate system in the scene. That is to say, we can know now the direction is the z-axis, and this is the x-axis, and this is the y-axis, and this is the y-axis. If in a real project, don't want to show this small coordinate, we just need to turn it off. Okay, the second one in the scene, I generally recommend turning it off. The second one is the main camera. In fact, we have two cameras. There are two cameras. One is called bird's eye camera. One is called the system camera. The C5 camera is specifically for C5 too. It will directly become a C5. The operation experience. Meanwhile, the cesium camera in our to open cesium can be directly controlled in the code, but not the bird's eye view camera. By default, we will select two views. Suppose we add some new cameras. We added some new cameras, such as adding a roaming camera. At this time, if I want to switch to the roaming camera scene, we have two ways. First, select the birds in the scene, and then select the main camera. To switch to the roaming camera, let's go back to the bird's eye view, or we double-click the roaming camera. It can directly switch to the roaming camera scene. And the whole experience of the roaming camera is our WSD. Up, front, back, left, right, and so on. Some basic effects. Okay, let's go back to bird's eye view. Okay, after looking at the camera, let's take a look at the settings below. Below is the view shading method, which means what way we are using to color. Our default is the rendering effect, which is the rendering effect. We can also click on solid. The solid is a relatively simple one. Which is faster? Of course, we can also choose wireframes to see what the current picture looks like, what the whole wiring looks like. Okay, let's go back to a default, rendering the scene. And then, we can see that under the entire technical, there is a render quality setting, which is defaulted to be hidden. As for the rendering quality, generally, it is not recommended to change it. Let me briefly explain it to you. First, anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing provides to anti-aliasing methods. Now, we don't recommend TA completely, because TA is not very mature. We recommend the default MSAA. Then there is a sampling number. The higher the sampling number, the lower the jaggedness in the entire picture. For our project to be compatible with the performance and the picture, we choose 4. If you have the highest requirements, having the highest requirements for jagged edges, we can choose 8. Then its performance will be reduced. If you have very low requirements, we can also choose 1. You can see here, there is a very obvious jagged feeling. Then there is output resolution. There are 2 types of output resolutions. One is based on component size, and the other is screen size. That is to say, when I use the component size, the current component, what resolution it is, it will be displayed at the highest resolution of 1. Will be displayed in this way. If I use screen size, that means when the screen is in this picture, even if I set it larger than the screen, it will only display at the resolution of the screen. So it 1t exceed the screen. We can directly. We usually just leave it as the default. These are all performance considerations. And finally, the resolution ratio. That is, if you think that on a super high definition screen, if you want that, you can choose to use the component size as the standard. If I set it to 1920 by 1080, even if it is stretched, it will still be the highest 1920 by 1800. We can reduce the ratio. If we pull it down by 0.5, it will be very blurry. These are used in some ultra-high definition, may be used on some super high-definition screens. Generally, we don't need it, so we'll put it away. Okay, the second part is our day-night switch. For the switch, we use a very common method because our wings engine is the biggest advantage of our wings engine. That is the volume clouds of the sky, dynamic sky, and some day-night effects are already defaulting in the project. You don't need to install any without installing any plugins. Let's take a look at the simplest position switch. We just pull it directly. Just pull it. This is the effect of switching between day and night. We can see that. We usually choose a roaming camera to look at the sky, Okay, let's pull it again. Camera switch. In the scene. Okay, like this. The whole scene is switched to night. We can see there are still stars at night when we talk about the sky in the next class. We'll explain to you what the settings of the sky are like. Sometimes, we hope we can directly, according to the current system time. We just need to select the system time, and then select the correct time zone. Of course, Of course, everyone can choose different time zones. Of course, we can also let time pass. Time passing, which means our current. If the entire time is. We sometimes need to switch between day and night, right? We also want it to pass automatically. We set the current daily time to 60 minutes. We shorten it, and we make it only 2 minutes a day. Now you can see the whole picture. Relatively, there will be a little. There will be some flickering effects. That's because we've turned down the cloud quality. When we talk about the sky later, we will explain how to adjust the cloud quality. Well, we'll soon see the sunrise. Of course, at the same time, some fog is turned on by default, which causes the whole picture. Sometimes it will be brighter. We will turn off the fog by default, because fog has color. And also turn off the scattering colors, so that the day-night switch will be more natural. Okay, it will take 1 minute to pass the day. Okay, you can see the whole picture. As I mentioned earlier, if you think the clouds are too dazzling, we can turn on high-quality clouds. Then the flickering effect will be much better. Actually, we can just keep it on low by default. Okay, this is our day-night switching function. Let's feel it again. It's defaulted to manual. Let's take a look, so that we can control the day and night switch. So you can also in some specific places. Excuse me. Back to this. You can choose to choose the whole seat switching like this. At times simultaneously. You can also directly set it to the passage of time. You can also set, by default, we. It doesn't make much sense, but if we need to use the family planning system later, or some family planning data, such as longitude, latitude, longitude, and altitude data, and when we mark points, we will use it. That is to say, we can set the current center point, set to a certain longitude and latitude position, especially in Argus system. I'll talk about it in detail later. And our longitude and latitude position corresponds to that is to say, for example, I'm here. Suppose I want to add a marker point. And I'll talk about it later. You add a marker point. Add a marker here. And this marker point can come from data. The data is the latitude and longitude coordinates. How do we convert the longitude and latitude coordinates? This kind of spatial coordinates in this picture? It is actually through this. The center longitude and latitude. That is to say, we set the latitude and longitude of the center point to 120 decimal degrees, latitude 30, and 5.1 meters in altitude. Is 1 degree away from this longitude, 1 point away from the longitude. Is calculated using the Webb Mercator projection. If you do calculations, you will use it more often and used more. Usually when we do array stretching, it is not used much. In addition to the above points, the rest are basically post-processing systems, which is also called post-processing. Let's take a look at some common post-processing systems, such as contrast. The higher we pull it, the stronger the contrast will be. The same goes for saturation. The saturation will make the colors brighter. Here, pay attention to hue. You can see the effect directly. It's because we have hue intensity. When we pull the hue intensity, the entire hue will change. Brightness, as the name suggests, will become brighter. Below is tone mapping. Let me explain it. In our default situation, what we render is actually an HDR image, then HDR to M, to LDR. It is called the measurement factor. If you don't understand, you can keep aces. This is the standard. Most of the major engines will use this color mapping function. If you occasionally understand it, if you think ADS is not good, we can change it to none. But when we change it to none, there will be a lot of overexposure. This needs to be adjusted by you. So by default, I don't recommend you to do this. Okay, then for the next sound. It's obvious when we open it directly. That is to say, sometimes we need to put some other things around it. That is, to place some other components. At this time, I need a gradient effect. When placing components here, it won't look unclear. The intensity and color can be adjusted. And the jitter is to add some of this. Noise will make the whole picture. It will have a certain texture. Especially when you simulate that, called light, which is light stepping or light tracing effects. This jitter is actually very good. It's a stylistic effect. Color grading. Color grading is even more complicated. This is actually similar to somewhat similar to tone mapping. It just uses a three-dimensional image to map each color. To map each color into another color. If you have corresponding color grading files, it is very suitable. But if you don't have it, don't turn on this function easily. Okay, the exposure below. Exposure is actually very similar to the brightness in post-production. Has a special feature that we can set it to automatic exposure. I've already talked about this in the last class. This is a person. This is also, which we also call human eye adaptation. It's actually learning from the human eye. It will automatically adjust the exposure in a dark place. The pupils will dilate. In a bright place, the pupils will shrink, which is equivalent to lowering the exposure. I don't recommend you to use it when you are not familiar with it. Just keep the manual settings as default. The exposure can also be adjusted. It's similar to brightness, but it is sunk. Good diffusion and glow. This is very, very important. I also briefly talked about it in the last class. General speaking, is for our sci-fi style, but also for realistic styles. General lighting can not only make the entire picture, some bright areas, but also creates a halo effect around it. At the same time, it will make the entire picture. Reflecting areas also have a halo effect. Let's take a look. The most intuitive thing is, let's take a look at the sun. Let's find the position of the sun. Okay, let's look here first. Here is a scene where the sunlight. A scene where the water's surface reflects sunlight. After turning on the ambient light, the water's surface will start to glow, creating a sparkling effect. Meanwhile, when we look at the sun, hey! Found it! 3. Okay. Let's look at the sun. The sun will also glow like this. If we turn off the floodlights, the sun will not glow. Of course, It's also suitable for night effects, for such an effect. After we dragged it to night, suppose this thing has a glowing effect. Then it will also reflect light. Let's add a sphere. Let's take a look. Let's make the sphere a little smaller. 20.2. Okay, let's set a glowing color for the ball. Red. Okay, if we adjust it to a gray light, it will directly emit light. Let's take a look first. Let's compare the two effects of ambient light and glow. We set it to this kind of glow. It will directly glow. Because for the glow, as long as you adjust the glow, it will directly glow, but glow is more suitable for some effects of our textile. How can we achieve the same effect with floodlights? I need to adjust the luminous intensity to be brighter, as you can see, so that it can reflect light. Of course, in the future, we'll make an automatic switch. That is, we will have an option called automatically adapt to the reflection and glow. At that time, you don't need to manually adjust the luminous intensity. Okay, now, you need to manually adjust the luminous intensity. Okay, everyone knows that. Let me explain it again. The diffuse light is more suitable for realistic style. Effect. It can not only make the bright areas in the entire picture to produce overflow light, but also for reflective effects, but also the reflection effect. It also produces glow for luminous objects, but the downside is that you need to increase the luminous intensity of the material. Even if you adjust the basic color intensity, it can still reflect light. It depends on the light intensity in the entire picture. But for the glow, it only reads the luminescence of the entire material. For example, when I click on glow, as long as you set the glow, it will glow, no matter how strong it is. But if you don't set the glow, even if I turn this up, it won't work. Okay, let's take a look. Suppose I don't set the glow here. Okay, I'll make this image very bright. There will be no blooming effect, but if you set the glow, it will appear. So everyone should pay attention to this difference. Overall, diffuse light is suitable for realistic style. Glow is suitable for the textile. Okay, this is ambient light and glow. Of course, there are some differences between them. Specific differences, which are some settings, which usually includes intensity, clarity. Just set it according to your own situation. Generally speaking, it is recommended not to touch it. Screen space reflection. Screen space reflection is a relatively advanced effects. I'll talk about it together with ambient occlusion. It is a post-production effect, especially when we are making water. We often want to see a plane space reflection effect. Notice that the water, we actually give it a reflection texture. Reflection texture. So it will have such a reflection effect. Let's turn off the reflection texture first. Okay, you can see that the water now has no reflection at all. But theoretically, it should reflect this. Such a building! If we turn on screen space reflection, the moment we turn on screen space reflection, the entire wing's engine, whale twins will switch rendering pipelines. Because of screen space reflection, we need to obtain some information about normal vectors. So when we don't turn it on, it is a forward rendering. After turning it on, it will switch to a pipeline called deferred rendering, so it will be a little laggy. Then at this time, we click on the water again and turn it on. Oh, sorry. It's been a long time since I logged in. It will be a little laggy. Open the screen space reflection. Then, let's adjust the roughness and metalness. Now it's too dark. Okay, everyone can see that. The effect has already appeared here. Let's turn this off. You can feel it. Hey, this color is wrong. Brighten it up. Let's turn this off first. Okay, we can see that there will be a distinct reflection in it. Of course, this reflection can actually reflect the real one. It's because our current light is absorbed more, because it's very dark now. If we adjust it to be brighter, then we can. Suppose we increase the precision. You can see such a clear reflection. But under normal circumstances, I don't recommend you to do that. Precision is actually determines the intensity of your reflection. But for normal water, the more oblique the angle, the more obvious. So under normal circumstances, I recommend you to set the metalness to 0. At the same time, the more it looks like water. We can see that the more oblique, the greater the reflection intensity is. The more like this, the smaller the reflection intensity will be. If we turn off the water and turn off screen space reflection, we can see this effect. So, generally, we turn on screen space reflection for water. However, screen space reflection has a delay in rendering. For some computers with poor performance, it is not friendly. So, if your computer has good performance, you can turn on screen space reflection. If your computer's performance is not good, don't turn on screen space reflection. Okay, I'll turn off the overall screen space reflects off, then it will be gone. Let's take a look at ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion can significantly increase the realism of the entire image. Okay, let's turn it off and then turn it on. You can see that in this case, in these places, in these corners. It will dim the whole picture a little bit. But here, we also have a difference. If we turn on screen space reflection, for this case, that is, after we switch to the deferred rendering pipeline, our ambient occlusion quality will improve. This is also a performance consideration. If you turn it off directly, ambient occlusion will use the one with better performance, which has better performance, but the overall effect is worse. If you turn it on, we'll use an algorithm that is slightly weaker, but the effect is better. So everyone should do as follows. That is, computers with better performance. Turn on screen space reflection on computers. And turn off the screen space reflection. And then, at this time, ambient occlusion will also be adjusted accordingly. To adjust our algorithm to adapt to the current performance. Generally speaking, for those who have high requirements for the whole picture, I recommend you to turn on screen space reflection and also turn on ambient occlusion. This will create, such as in places like these, create some ambient light shadows, which will enhance a sense of depth. Let's turn it off and take a look. It will significantly enhance the depth of the entire picture. Of course, we also have GTL and SSL here. I don't recommend you to use GTL. Just use SSL for now. Okay, the next one is motion blur. Motion blur is when I move, it will become blurred. Ah, you can see it. If I don't turn it on, there is no motion blur at all. Motion blurred. It's actually a kind of called. It's also called anti-aliasing. Normally, if you are in that situation, you can see that there will be obvious trailing effects. If you are in that, when there are many camera switches, I recommend you to turn on motion blur. However, if it's first-person perspective, I don't recommend you to do that. Sometimes in first-person view, if the motion blur is not adjusted well, it will make the first person very dizzy. Secondly, when the FPS is particularly low, it is not recommended to turn on motion blur because it's already very laggy. Then when you turn on the motion blur, the whole picture will very bad, very yellow. Okay, the last one is depth of field. This is relatively less adjusted. I won't talk about it here. The adjustment of the entire scene. Of course, for the scene, there are many settings. Should be matched with our materials, such as our glow and bloom, such as our flat space reflection, should be adjusted according to the material. Meanwhile, there are some settings, such as our automatic exposure, should be adjusted with the light intensity. I'll explain this in the later part. I will also add it later. Okay, that's all for today's class. Thank you all.